Hi, it's Andrew and welcome to another edition of the Performance Intelligence Podcast, the podcast about all things human performance. Optimize performance through adapting your physical, psychological and emotional state. Martin Sheppard is a leader whose extensive range of skills and strategic vision has significantly shaped KPMG in Australia and around the world, and he has had a major impact on my career. As the National Chairman of KPMG Australia, Martin is responsible for steering the firm's strategic direction and ensuring it remains at the forefront of professional services. He sits on the KPMG Global Board and has held key roles in client growth, technology, brand innovation, and executive leadership. Over the years, I've witnessed Martin's unwavering dedication to upholding the high standards of governance and integrity, as well as his evolution as a leader, and we're going to dig into that today. Martin left the safe confines of consulting in 2016 to take up the challenging role of CEO and Managing Director at Spotless, where he led the organisation through a tumultuous period as a public company after it came out of private equity ownership. Martin stabilised the business, which had over 30,000 employees, and he led the organisation through a successful acquisition by Downer EDI. Martin is not just a corporate guy, he's also a former Australian champion kayaker. He is a combi driving backpacker, or he was. He's a passionate sailor, having completed 10 Sydney to Hobart races with his brother. He's a motorcycle enthusiast and he's proud father of Henry and Ella. Martin Sheppard, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. It's good to be here.
Really interesting researching you. And for full context for people watching this on YouTube or listening on the traditional podcast, we've known each other for a number of years. So I thought I'd put together a rough frame today and then we can dance and dodge and dive. Did you watch Dodgeball?
I did, actually.
Dodge, duck, dive, dip and dodge.
You're going to learn to be true dodgeballers. Then you've got to learn the 5 Ds of dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
I thought I'd better give a frame, otherwise you and I will talk for a long, long time. Number one, I want to start with our background and when our roles reversed a couple of years ago. 2, executive life and how you've trained to do the work you do. When I talk to you sometimes, Marty, I'm tired when you tell me about your week, last week, let alone your last month. 3, resilience and adapting to change. With Spotless for you, it was horrific. The external person would say, you probably say, it was a great challenge that first month, and we'll go back to that. 4, you have what I call intellectual horsepower and that adaptability to put patterns together. I want to know, is there a method to that or is that just genetic? And 5, let's talk about the future of consulting. But before we do all that, how are you? How's life? What's going on? What's exciting you?
Yeah, no, life's good, Andrew. And I think, as you said, we've known each other more than 10 years now. And it's interesting how...
Is it 10 years?
Well, I think it was around 2014 or thereabouts that we were doing some business together. So, time flies. But no, life is good, Andrew.
It's full. I told you this in preparation for this podcast last week, but I was at a conference last year. It was with Deutsche Bank. I had the Asia Pac CEO reading out my CV. And as he got halfway through it, because I've got for speaking, there's a short one, which we normally send. Somehow he'd got my long one. And so he's saying Andrew was an athlete. Andrew did exercise science and sports coaching and coaching. And he was going through everything and it's boring me. But as I'm sitting there and then he said, and he's fit all this into quite a young life. And I had this parallel thought. One of my best mates reckons I've got undiagnosed adult ADHD. And I just went, I reckon he's right as he was reading out my CV. So you know my theory on you as well.
Well, there's probably a reason why, the old adage goes that if you want something done, you give it to a busy person. Because I think people that are motivated and self-starters and, that push to cram, something into every extra spare minute of the day, I think they can be incredible contributors. I think there's... You call it adult ADHD. I probably call it just drive and energy. I think if you pull apart your own approach to life. I think for me, actually, it goes right back to my late teen years. I lost my father really early. I was just second year uni, so I guess I was 18 or 19 years old. And from perfect health, he contracted quite an aggressive cancer and passed away in 6 months. And I think probably from that day, I've always kind of felt an obligation to him to not miss a minute, and it's slightly challenging. And I think you just need to check yourself now and again because you can run out of energy. But it is a good motivator, actually. You know, the future's uncertain and therefore you ought to kind of make the most of it.
Well, we'll go back to how we met. Let's keep going on that because that's such a real story, such a authentic story, and I appreciate you sharing that. You came to my office 18 months ago, 2 years ago, when you'd made the decision to run for chair. And you said, I've done a presentation. Can you have a look at it? And you did it, and you can tell everyone how graphic I was. You can judge the feedback. But do you remember what I said to you when you showed me your original presentation?
I don't remember the exact words, but I was left in no doubt as to how far it missed the mark by. But look, I mean, I think I was here for a reason. I think one of the things that you learn over a professional career is you tend to surround yourself, just natural human biases tend to cause you to gravitate to people that are like you and that share common views. So ordinarily you'd go to someone with a presentation like you and I guess subconsciously you'd be seeking validation. And I didn't come to see you for that reason. I was actually seeking someone out that I knew, would discharge both barrels if that's what it needed. And I think that's why I was in your shop.
It was an interesting conversation because it had gone from when I was at KPMG, the terminology was a junior burger, so a junior partner, and you were going to be my boss. We'll get back to that. We never actually worked for each other.
It was a sliding doors moment,
I thought it was me. But when you came to my office and said, I'm doing this, and you went through the presentation, I said, Marty, now have we got permission to shift the roles? You went, of course, mate, of course. And I went, bang, bang, bang. And you went, geez, I don't think you had that much permission. And you laughed, but I ripped up your presentation. I said, mate, that's fucking horrible. Where's the spirit? Where's the man that I know who's caring, compassionate, and a real people person? So we spoke to a couple of different people and they got their view of you, highly intelligent, unbelievable at putting patterns together, but moving so fast. And then when you told people that story, just so many people, didn't they, came up to you, and I had feedback as well. Oh, I now get Martin. I get why he's moving so fast. Yeah, he's highly intelligent. Yeah, he does care. But I understand now. It was like the light bulb moment went on.
Yeah, I mean, they're interesting reflections, aren't they? I mean, I probably, in crafting, that really important presentation, you steer away from the things you're uncomfortable with. And I'd spent a good part of my career getting feedback that I moved quickly and I was highly effective. But the challenge that I always had was that you're just about to cross through the finishing tape and you swivel your head round and it turns out there's absolutely no one behind you. And then by the time you loop back, sweep people up and you all cross the line together, it's taken longer than if you'd all moved together as one pack. And so I guess I didn't want to tell that narrative that had, sort of too much energy and drive and activity in it because I kind of felt that it was a negative. So yeah, but interesting.
Was that a real learning for you? Because I find, I work with a bunch of leaders and I've actually recently was told I've got a 100% success rate of working with people to go for a chair or CEO role. So if I'm working with future clients, I don't want to muck that up. But was that a learning for you that it is okay to show your true authentic self? In fact, it's more than okay. You connect with people on a whole different level.
I think you need to be authentic. I think a lot of people coach that you need to be vulnerable to be real.
Did Wizard wind you up?
And
because I see leaders sometimes now, let me be vulnerable with you. I'm like, oh, you don't say let me be. You be vulnerable. You be authentic. You show your story.
Yeah, I think if you're a resilient person that you might never be seen to crumble in public life, and you may choose to have an extraordinarily private life. And I think that's okay too. I mean, I think that, you just need to mean what you say and, follow through on the commitments you make and just have that genuine authenticity. I think that's what you need to speak to. And also, Andrew, I mean, I think we're talking about a particular point in time in a presentation. I mean, ultimately, you've got to believe it and you've got to own it and you've got to be able to speak to it. It's your own material. So the notion of having someone position something for you and you stand up and be the spokesperson, I just don't think that works. I think people see through that.
The mind map we did, though, going through your career, I think even letting people know that you're an athlete, the story about your dad, just some of the things you've done outside gave that richness that people go, oh, he's a real person. I was really proud of you. Remember after that, I gave you a hug and it felt like, I think I even said, I'm really proud of your son. Because it was a beautiful shift. And to me, it showed for you, you're not that leader that goes, oh, yeah, look, when Andrew and Maisie came in, I was the big dog and he was junior. It just showed this adaptability for you to actually go, hey, who can I get for a deferring view? And I think that's a really important part of leadership, not looking at hierarchy or rank. And it was a real shift in our relationship.
I think maybe one realisation through the work we did together was that I suspect I've learned as much about leadership outside work as I have at work. And I think it's when you traverse your human journey outside work, and then you start to connect the threads to what's transpired in a work environment. You start to get the connections, and you see where you developed resilience, and where you were sort of caused to lead through adversity, and where you've had your peak periods of learning, the things that you've done that have sort of been off script. I think it's those things. That was probably the penny that dropped for me, is that there's enormous value in that whole side of the story. There's 50% of the story I'm not telling here, which is actually at least as significant a contributor to what I might be able to add going forward.
And that's what makes you interesting. It what gives you colour. It what gives you that real interest where other people go, I didn't know that about Marty. That's really interesting.
I was, and perhaps you'll get onto this, Andrew, but I was recently with Mike Baird, former New South Wales Premier, and we were talking about leadership, and he's given so much to public life. And I said, how did you manage those sorts of roles? And, how do you show up as a leader every day? And he said, well, if you really think about it, every person that turns up to work in an organisation brings something really valuable. You all turn up, you've got a job to do. It's just the job is different. So as a leader, his sort of catchphrase was, to be a successful leader, you need to hold it lightly, but use it greatly. Hold it lightly, but use it greatly, meaning that it's not the position which defines you. You have the privilege of the position, but then you ought to feel the insecurity and the anxiety that comes with having to deliver what's expected of the role. And he said, if you need something to get you out of bed every morning and drive you, it's that. And I've always felt that. It levels the playing field. Everyone's got a contribution to make. But to the point about people's interests outside work, I am a great believer in finding out what makes people tick. And you often find that people that do exceptionally well in a work environment, have great mental health and are driven in life. They're often people that have a passion outside work that runs really deep. And from my perspective, I don't care whether it's sport or a choir or your church or whatever it is, but find something, basket weaving. It really doesn't actually matter.
Did I tell you I started basket weaving? How did you know this? You're so
But it's, you see my point. I'm being slightly facetious, but it actually doesn't matter. It's just, you need to be doing other things. So,
do you think that's an important recruitment question moving forward? Because people present the CV that shows all the work skills, showing they've got something outside. Do you know any interviews where they ask that? Tell me about what you're doing outside for executive roles.
Yeah, well, look, maybe. I hadn't really thought about it, but if you think about the generation of people that we're recruiting now, they're digital natives. They've probably spent a good part of their childhood in their bedroom on a device. And I know we joke about that, but I think, there is now probably more probing in areas other than the technical capability, and more around what brings balance and what brings perspective, and what sorts of experience have you had that drive judgment, all of which are important things to be successful.
I do want to talk more about leadership, but there's an open loop, especially for our listener and our viewer. I mentioned you changed my life. So let's go back. We met, you said 10 years ago, 2014 or 2015. I had a business then called The Performance Clinic. Wayne Treby, who at that stage was the CFO at KPMG, was in one of the workshops we did. I went and met Wayne at the old office here, which is next to the current building at Barangaroo. And I thought I was going there to present Wayne a program to do work with his team. And at the end of it, he just threw in, are you interested in having an organisation acquire your business? And I went, tell me more. My eyes lit up. And he said, I want you to meet this guy named Martin Sheppard, who's head of our innovation. I think we met a couple of weeks later. It's a bit like dating when you sell a business. Have you ever had anyone say this to you when you're buying a business? It is like dating.
I mean, there's definitely a courting aspect to it, to see whether, because it starts with chemistry. You need to, particularly when you're the bigger business, meeting a proprietor. I think I've definitely felt
you
that.
rocked into the coffee shop. I've said this regularly, and Bruce Phillips asked me not to say it, but I say that you and Bruce, the two most immaculately dressed men at KPMG. You came in, you had the suit, and you looked $1 million. At first, I met you in Melbourne, actually, in the previous office. I think you'd just come from a BHP meeting. You rock in, highly intelligent, but there was this cheekiness there as well. Now, when you sell a business, how long do you reckon it should take? Like if you were selling a small business up to someone else, how long would you say it's going to take to sell a business normally?
I'd say it depends on who you're selling to. The bigger and more corporatised the organisation, the longer it takes.
We thought it was going to be about 3 or 6 months, and it got sort of stuck a little bit. Stuck for two reasons, I think, because the way consulting firms were looking at buying little boutique businesses like the one I had then, punching above its weight. It was a traditional EBITDA model, which didn't really work for the acquisition. But also during that period, it was like dating. You almost ghosted me. I didn't know what was going on. I sent you emails. I tried calling. Eventually, I thought, geez, I'm going to send him a text message. There was something going on behind the scenes at that stage as well, which you couldn't tell me.
I'll come back to that, but I mean, I think if I reflect on what we were doing as a firm and why the performance clinic was of interest. So where KPMG is a firm that's evolved over 150 years. From a initially a sort of bookkeeping, accounting business to an audit firm to a tax firm, corporate finance, consulting, people and change, technology, and so on and so forth. The evolution of the business over that period of time has been pretty significant. And in that period in 2014, I had a role on the executive which was around growth. So driving our growth agenda, and part of that has to be organic, and part of it should, in a sensible strategy, be inorganic. So we were looking to kind of see how we could build out our capability set and how we could do it by buying skills that we didn't already have. In my mind, at that time, the opportunity was, we were doing people and change consulting, but the technology and platform-based businesses were really starting to evolve at that time. So for me, it was, how can we as an organisation think about an extension to our business from advice through to a trailing service where people stay engaged, and if you like, you sort of make revenue whilst you sleep without further personal exertion. So you had a really, really great concept. You were a sort of a fledgling technology business starting to think about how you could keep people engaged.
I think fledgling is a compliment to what we're doing now.
But then we, at the same time, were starting to form some really significant partnerships, with the large tech companies, and talking to organisations like Telstra and others that had very large client bases. So if you sort of think about business performance and people's performance, you were sort of working in an area that corporates were failing at. And if you could kind of engage people in those sorts of programs and keep them on board so they could build a baseline and they could continue to use that reference point, I could really see the vision for how together a big brand with a significant client base playing at the top end of town with a smaller organisation that had kind of really landed on the fact that if you're going to be your best self at work, you have to bring your whole person, and you've got to be healthy in mind and body, and so on and so forth. And then you overlay a digital platform. Those things together really made sense for me. But I think what you're
10 years ahead of your time. Like, I look at the work we're doing now. I think you had the vision. I jumped onto it. Maybe some other people around didn't quite see that. You are often 5 years ahead of yourself.
Yeah, I think you do need to have eyes on the end state and be unrelenting, because there's going to be a lot of dips along the way that make something look unviable. Big businesses tend to work on ROI and return on investment, return on capital employed, and all those sorts of things, which are hardwired metrics. But I think if you're trying to get to a vision, it's sort of like people tend to run businesses for a 12-month outcome, not a 10-year vision. And maybe that's where there was not the same alignment. But I think what you're alluding to is just as we were shaping up and
when you ghosted me,
doing the deal,
Marty, where are you?
I was being courted for another role outside the firm, and that's actually what happened. And that was that sliding door moment we talked about earlier, which is the acquisition was complete and you joined just as I left to do the.
Well, not only were we sliding doors, you did a great job, and it took a bit longer for a whole bunch of reasons, but when it was all done, then you left to Spotless. I signed up with KPMG. I was there for 3 years, stayed consulting for a little bit longer, but when I officially left, I got a phone call from you, and we stayed in contact all that time as well. But literally after I'd retired from the partnership, you went back 3 or 4 months later, and I rang you up and went, mate, if you got a problem, just tell me. You are largely responsible for getting my business in. You leave, I come in, then I leave, you come back. Mate, have we got a problem? You're like, no, mate, it's just sliding doors. The notion of mentors, from the Latin word mentore, you have been and you still are a mentor of mine. There's a whole bunch of things you do that I've learned so much from. I loved when we flipped and I mentored you a little bit in the speaking. But I want to ask you, who are some of the mentors that you have? And you can have a mentor that you know, or it could even be someone you don't know that you look at, but you've wanted to model to be more like them. Who comes to mind?
Yeah, before I get into people, I think about mentors a bit differently. I actually don't think you choose a mentor. I think a mentor chooses you. So often I have people come to me and they either ask whether I would be a mentor or who would be a good mentor for them. And I just challenge them to sort of stop and think, because, I think most of us, our great mentors, have been fantastic for sort of inexplicable reasons. And by that I mean they're people that sort of seem for some unknown reason to have your interests at heart more so than anyone else's. And it's a bit like, if you think of a family unit, your extended family, uncles and aunts and grandparents and so on, there's people you connect with differently, and there's often one person that seems to have an eye on you and cares about your well-being much more than anyone else. That's your mentor. So I think if you're in a work environment, in a social environment, and there's that person who you always feel has a loose cover on you even when they're not around you, and they're really interested in your well-being. They give you the odd suggestion around something you might think about. They're never imposing. That's your mentor. So I think if you're starting the process to work out who you ought to seek counsel from, they've probably chosen you, and it's a matter of just identifying that person.
I've never ever heard it explained like that.
I think people generally use mentor. And there's lots of value you can get out of speaking to someone that's got much more experience than you. But if the meter's running or you really don't have a connection, it's not going to be as effective as it will be if you...
I'm running a parallel, Paul. There's 4 or 5 mentors I've had in my life that have just been significant influencers and supporters and contributors. And I'm going through each one. They popped up. They literally popped up in work I was doing, one through a mutual friend. So I'm having this parallel moment. I'm going, so it's almost serendipitous. The mentor comes when the student is ready.
Often you know the answer. You just need someone to help you excavate it. That's what that individual can do, and they can give you a sense of perspective across other things. So often if they know you well, that can help. Otherwise, you can consume a lot of time and effort just getting the common ground. Look, I had one mentor that springs to mind for me. He was a former chairman of KPMG, actually, a guy by the name of Doug Dukes. He was the least likely person to be the chairman of a big consulting, accounting and tax firm. His undergraduate degree was zoology, and he was incredibly...
There's an obvious joke there about working with animals.
Zoology was his undergraduate degree. He was the quietest, shyest and most humble person I think I've ever met. And for all the reasons we just talked about, for some reason he seemed to have an interest in me and challenged me and got me involved in things that I was nowhere near ready for. But he was prepared to kind of give me those opportunities and then support me in doing so. But the great thing I learned from him, which was not me at that time, was that his shyness and his introvertedness and his extreme empathy made him the most phenomenal seller of anything. Because people within a 20-minute conversation wanted to tell them about their deep family history. He just had that really engaging, listening, caring ear. And that was at the heart of relationship building. So I benefited a huge amount from him in terms of the support, but also in terms of observing someone and the way that they do things and what sort of styles of leadership can be highly effective. And Andrew, you and I talked a bit about this over a coffee. I mean, people often ask me, what's your leadership style? And, I'd reflect that it's different in different circumstances. People say, well, what does that mean? Sort of say, well, you can lead from the front of the room, 20 people in a room, and you charge straight to the front and you grab the whiteboard marker and you start directing traffic and you enter the room with not much and you leave with a plan. Well, that's great. That's what leadership sometimes looks like. But when's the right time to lead from the back of the room and let someone else take the whiteboard marker? Let everyone work through the process and maybe 5 minutes before the end, offer a view and say, well, thanks very much, but Mary, I haven't heard from you, and John, I haven't heard from you. What do you think about where we've landed? And then input gently from the back of the room to kind of shape the output, and then you all leave as a team as well. So you've been just as effective as a leader, but you've done it in a very different way.
That's experience though. I found when I was young, and even when I first entered KPMG, I was still early 40s back then, I thought I had to make a bit of noise, postulate. What I've really learnt the last few years, and working with some great coaches in sport has taught me this as well, is exactly that range. There's times when you need to roar and make an impact. And there's times where the best thing to do is shut up. Tony Grant, God bless him, was the head of coaching psychology unit at Sydney University, passed away way too young. But Tony said, as a coach, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. I'd extend that as a leader. 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that is sometimes the best way to lead. Rolls right into the start. I said I do want to talk about leadership capacity because, that's something I'm hugely passionate about. We've got leadership capability, which most organisations, you might go to INSEAD or Harvard or do an MBA, and that's all the leadership frameworks, which is hugely important in your role at KPMG and all the roles you've had. But that leadership capability is effectively how you lead yourself. So I want to double click on that. And I know some of this, but some of it I don't. So I'm not going to come to this with a cognitive bias. But going back, way back, young Marty, the young punk, did you, in your 20s, so through reference Doug, Dukes and other people, did you go, hey, I need to learn some skills now to future-proof myself? Or did that just happen as a fluke?
Look, I'm an incredibly curious person. And so inside or outside.
Understatement. I reckon you're one of the most curious people I know.
No, I mean, it does.
Constantly
It does drive me, and I feel motivated when I'm actually learning something new. So perhaps the downside of that is I'm jack of lots of things but master of none, because it's actually the process of learning rather than the perfecting. So look, I mean, even when I was a young guy, I've been passionate about all sorts of sports. I've done lots of walking. I've taught myself how to be a sort of a backyard mechanic. I've rebuilt a house. I've done lots of things which I had zero skills to start with. But I think if you've got reasonable...
Can I just pause? Because there's some people listening to this going, oh, I'm tired. I've done a 38-hour week and God, this weekend I've got to take the shitty kids to school sport. You've built a house. You've sailed 10 Sydney to Hobart races. You've worked for a organisation for decades. You're on the global board. Every time I talk to you, I make the joke, you have 3 homes. You have one in Sydney, one in Melbourne, one in Qantas. The amount of travel. I think you're downplaying just the amount that you get done. Like, did you ever have that moment, like when I had that leader at Deutsche Bank doing my CV and I just had a bit of a laugh going, yeah, I reckon I do have some sort of either superpower, because ADHD channeled the right way can be a superpower. But do you ever pause and just go, shit, old Shep's achieved a fair bit? Or are you just still on the path on, hey, I want to learn, I want to keep growing, keep evolving?
No, I mean, I haven't sort of had that stock take, if you like. I mean, I think there's plenty of time to do that. And I do, I mean, I think anyone that says that they go and go and go, it's like the ever-ready bunny, you can only do so much as a human. I mean, when I did 2 major property renovations, I took a year off work. So I didn't work professionally one day in the year of my 50th birthday. And I needed a reset. Some people take a career break, early in their career. Well, I took one in my 50th year. It was the best thing that I could have done. That gave me the time and space to, to do something properly. Oddly, I found myself, with a long list on the kitchen bench, and I found myself jumping out of bed at 5 a.m.
Most people do a sabbatical and they go to the Mediterranean, they pick the olives and, they see the morning goat, and they just have all this time to reflect. You do multiple renovations.
I became a master of YouTube because there's not much you can't do. But look, I think back to ways that leadership develops. I think if you do lots of things, and you've touched on some of the things outside work that I've been interested in, but it's not just being engaged in them. Somehow or other, when I've done those things, I've found myself into, whether you call it leadership, I think I'm most satisfied when I'm at the hub with the spokes around me. So I sort of find myself, I took up sailing and then, or big boat sailing, and then 18 months later, I was the Commodore of a sailing club. And then, I find in terms of if it's motorcycling on the weekend, I'm the one at, 10 o'clock at night shooting out the route map for the weekend. And I don't know why, but there's something I really enjoy about being at the epicenter of things. And I think when you do all those things, you do develop leadership skills.
Yeah, I know why. It's called congruence. There's a saying in yoga, how you show up on the mat is how you show up in life. Right. So the lady or the guy that rocks into yoga, late, right on time, sorry, stepping over everyone else who's there going, numbers day punk, spills the water bottle, and we're meant to be in yoga. They show up to life like that. There's just this red thread or congruence through everything you do. You've got to do it properly or don't do it at all.
Yeah. I think the other thing, just in terms of leadership, I'm not a big emailer and I'm not a big meeting requester. In fact, I'm sort of more an attendee at a meeting because someone else wants something. And I think because true leadership is actually knocking hurdles over and getting things out of the way and empowering other people to do things and giving them the support to do it. And then if there's anything that you really need to call a meeting for or you need to move very quickly on, in my mind, it's the things you're going to say no to. Because why let an organisation or people burn and exert energy and effort on something that ultimately you don't think is strategically the right move? So in a world where we're just totally ambushed by all sorts of communications and so on, and I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but my disposition is to more likely pick up the phone and it'll be a 15-minute conversation. And it's interesting because in the generations that follow us, Andrew, people are less comfortable talking. They communicate.
Send me a text or send me a message.
Even to the point where, it's sort of interesting in our household if someone has to call to order takeaway food. I mean, if I ask one of the kids, I'll be straight onto an iPad and it'll be ordered. And talking about health, you know me better than most people, but I'm not tough when it comes to nutrition and diet. I'm a pragmatist, and I don't think you can live a life where you spend a lot of time travelling, because the reason that food in restaurants tastes so great is because it's just laden with salt and butter and all those sorts of things. But you do need to do those, corporate events and those sorts of things. You need to travel and you eat airline food and so on. So, that I've done almost every year without exception for the last 10 or more, instigated by you, a thing called the Shred, which is, every year for 4 to 6 weeks, mostly 4, but sometimes 6, no dairy, no sugar, no alcohol, no
processed carbs,
no processed carbs, and
basically no life for a month.
Pretty much, and the first week of that is tough. I think.
Do you remember the first one we did going back ages ago, and we had Teresa doing it, who was a nutritionist working with us, and after a week you rang me up and you went, mate, this is fucking horrible. Does it get any better? I said, look, it does get better. It's when you look in the mirror in week 4.
Yeah, well, I think the end of week 1, I did catch a train in the wrong direction because I'd sort of overdone the carb.
Did you? You never told me that.
I'd overdone the carb starvation.
Where was that?
My brain was just here, actually, North Sydney. I went north rather than south. But you do get this sort of cloudiness, if your body's just been feeding on simple carbohydrate and sugar and so on, then you come off it. It's probably, I find that I just live in a haze for a few days. So you've got to sort of pick your moments. And then after that, you find that you really get into the nourishment. And then actually by the end of it, you fundamentally changed what you choose and how you eat. And that lasts for about another 3 to 6 months.
And one or two a year. So for anyone listening to this, we've shortened it to a month now. I think 4 weeks, you get most of the benefits. You get 80 to 90% of the benefits. So we've just shortened that last 2 weeks.
But I think, I think from a mind perspective, it feels to me like you spend more than the first half of your life kind of exercising your mind and learning and building capability. And then there's a crossover point where I think you need to work really hard at protecting your mind, and how do you kind of keep the pathways open and continue with that sort of curiosity and so on. I think you have to be quite deliberate.
Paraphrase, I love that. And I'm getting all these quotes, Marty, today that I haven't heard you say before. We spend the first half of our life training and developing the brain, and we spend that second half of our life protecting it.
Yeah,
so it's true.
It's sort of protecting it and also making sure you free up the pathways to connect the experiences, because the learning doesn't come out of the thing that happens in a single silo. It happens from being able to connect a series of different experiences to perhaps have something that's valuable that no one else has. But I think, look, Suzanne and I, we are prolific sort of crossworders, and never the big crossword, just the really quick crossword, which we'll do.
The 5-year-old one that my daughter did.
Yeah, the remedial one.
I'll give you Sophia's one.
The remedial one. But those sorts of things, and I think, planning a bit more, there's other ways to kind of sort of suck up information, whether it be, curiosity around travel, and, lots of people have lots of time for reading. I mean, I have to confess, I am a prolific reader, but I'm a prolific reader of crap. And I think many people in my sort of situation...
like what constitutes crap? Are you reading?
Just I like to consume in short bites. So, a magazine or a newspaper or, something of that nature, as opposed to, Suzanne will just devour a book and she'll have 3 on the go at any one point in time. And I'm sort of good for about 3 chapters, because I like the intensity and the pace of, Harvard journals and all those sorts of things. So, that's kind of how I consume new information.
You host a podcast for KPMG. How do you research? So when you've got someone coming in, how do you research on them? Do you Google? What do you do to gather information about the person, to really find out about them?
I sort of start with my own assessment as to, when I think about that individual, what do I think about them and their achievements that attracts me to them, that sort of I have a curiosity around, because I suspect that that'll be the same curiosity someone else has. And I start with that. And then I kind of read through all the material, as I'm sure you do, and I try and plug it into those things that I'm curious about. So that's kind of the way
I do similar. We're more similar than I realised. I also talk to a few people that person knows, to really try and find out a few things that maybe I didn't know. So I spoke to 3 people. You can tell me which one you'd like me to go first. Suzanne Bell, your wonderful partner, Andrew Yates and Gary Windgrove. Andrew Yates is Australia KPMG CEO and Gary Windgrove is Global CEO. So who would you like me to start with, Suzanne, Yatesy or Gary?
Oh, please yourself. Curious to hear what each of them think.
Well, I wanted to get a bit of research. We'll go to Gary Windgrove first. So I did the research with Gary when I was over in London late last year with the Wallabies on the spring tour, and we had a breakfast, beautiful breakfast. Thank you, Gary. And then I ran back across Hyde Park to where I was staying. I said to Gary, look, I'm going to interview Marty next year on a podcast. I know you're busy, so I'll ask you now, what are the attributes that Martin has that you think really stand him alone? And he just looked at me, he said, it's energy. He said, he's always had energy. He said, Andrew, I do not know what you did with him with that shred thing, but ever since he's done that. So Gary was your boss here as Australia, now global CEO. He did also say Marty has a above average level of intellect, is great connecting with people and sees things that others don't. So it wasn't just energy. Rounded it out. I'm going to go with Suzanne, your partner, who I spoke to yesterday. She gave me a lovely overview as well. I asked Suzanne 3 questions. This is not in your running notes because you didn't know I'd done these interviews.
Oh, no, but I know her pretty well.
You know her pretty well?
I think I do.
So question number 1, I asked Suzanne to explain what she thinks are your strengths in your career. Number 2, the personal attributes. And number 3, any quirks. On question number 1, career strength, she said, you're very smart, trustworthy and genuine, great communicator. You can synthesise. Interesting, she used that word synthesise. We're going to get to that in a moment. You can synthesise a lot of information very quickly and provide clarity. Quite instinctive. You can read the mood of the room and you have a service mindset, not in it for yourself, but you want the very best for clients, for people in the broader community. That's very commensurate with what I think. Personal attributes. What do you reckon she would have said about your personal attributes?
I think she would have played on the maybe a bit of the adult ADHD.
Oh, that's the quirks. Let's get to that in a moment. The personal attributes, he's an adventurer, fun and up for anything. He's incredibly supportive, but can also push you in the right way. He's available. He always takes the call for me, for Ella, for Henry, his brother. He's very loving and a truly good man. Other words, on the personal front, he's caring, has high integrity, and he's a great human. That's beautiful.
Gee, that's generous.
Yeah.
I must have had a good weekend.
She's a wonderful woman. Hello, Suzanne. I'll make sure you listen to this as well. But she was glowing in her praise of what a wonderful person you are.
Yeah, look, I think that's very generous. I mean, as I said sort of early in the chat, I do like being at the centre of things, and I am a born organiser. So, that probably comes through in some of those things. But, I do believe that individuals are a product of those that are around them. And, you need the environment in which to shine. I've very much got that at home with Suzanne, but also, Henry and Ella, I've got these 2 incredible kids. They're in their mid to late 20s. And, whether taught or whether innate, they're both fiercely independent and self-starters, and they don't need to be motivated by anyone else to do things. And so, if the call goes out, they're there in a heartbeat. Nothing's ever too much trouble. But, I think from, if I reflect on the relationship that Suzanne and I have is, if you're like me and very energised and you do have that challenge around making sure that you get the balance right, she is a supreme intellect that reads and reads and reads and can ask a question like no one else, a really thought-provoking question. But also she knows how to relax. And, I think from the very first time that I met you, you talked about recharging. And, it's probably taken more than a decade, but I can actually go to bed without washing the dishes.
What?
I know.
Suzanne, I've been working on this bloke for over a decade. I'm in awe. Because you think recharging is renovating 2 homes, doing Sydney to Hobart, sailing race.
Yeah, I think that's, it can't just be about the activity. You need to have the pause and the reflection periods and the recovery times. And that's, for me, that's been taught.
Do you see the lightning bolts coming in this beautiful day? Wow.
That's been taught. But look, I mean, when you talk about some of those attributes, and we talk a bit about, you and I talk a lot about sport, and my great passion is sailing. And people say, in a year like we have in corporate life, why would you head out of Sydney Heads on Boxing Day and spend 3 or 4 days in the most hostile ocean on earth? Why would you do that? You go for 24 hours a day, you're on a platform that has no lighting, it's wet, you're freezing cold, you don't sleep, all those sorts of things. Well, I kind of do it for all of those benefits because it makes the rest of the year, frankly, seem so easy.
It's like you've read my running sheet and I haven't given you these. But I asked Andrew Yates. So Yatesy is the Australian CEO of KPMG. So a chair and CEO have a very close relationship. I said to Yatesy, what's a really good question to ask Marty? He said, ask him what being alone in Bass Strait has taught him about leadership.
Yeah, I mean...
You went there without me even asking.
Yeah, no, I don't know about leadership. I mean, if you sail a boat in that sort of environment, it's absolutely all about the team. And the only person that I would sail in a race like that with is my brother, because he and I know each other so well, and we can trust each other that we know that if all else fails between the two of us, we've got a reasonably good chance, of sorting something out. But I think the leadership piece is really around the hardship. So, it can be blowing 50 knots. You can be in the middle of Bass Strait with a 4 or 5 or 6 metre sea state, and it's just so hostile. It's you're really in survival mode with storm sails up. Everyone on the boat's seasick. It is absolutely thoroughly miserable. But I think when you get through those sort of situations, it does mean in the rest of the year, when something that is really high anxiety, tense stuff for the people around you, not to trivialise it, I don't want to trivialise it, but it is a bit like beating you over the head with a balloon. It's kind of, you can hear the noise, it's slightly irritating, you really want it to stop, but it's not going to kill you. And it helps you sort of keep whatever it is in perspective. And I think that really great leaders absorb pressure. They don't create it. And I think it's those sorts of experiences that give you, the resilience to be able to kind of go, well, actually, we've got more time than anyone thinks that we've got here. It's not blowing 50 knots. Timetables can move. We need to make the right decision, sort of hasten slowly. I'd encourage anyone to push themselves once a year. Do something that you wouldn't otherwise do. And I signed up to one event, which I ended up doing on my own because the other two guys that I agreed to do it with pulled out, and that was the Hawkesbury Canoe Classic. Yeah. And I can tell you 111 kilometres paddling down the Hawkesbury. And there'll be plenty of listeners to this, I'm sure, that have done it, but it's
drum roll, what are we doing? Because you're having your shoulder fixed, despite me banging on for 10 years. It's not going to mend by itself.
Yeah, your shoulder Tuesday week, we'll get a bit of a tune-up done there.
And what are we doing? Maybe this end of this year or at least next year? What's our adventure?
Well, probably the classic. Yeah. We're going to go and do it again. So we'll do a two-up this time maybe, so I can rely on you.
That excites me, and it also makes me feel nervous. Because it's a big event. You're paddling overnight. I think the biggest thing that gets people in that is not the endurance; it's the vertigo on the water at night.
Yeah, well, I like most things in my life, it came together relatively quickly, and I was up at Richmond where you sort of put in the water there at the top of the Hawkesbury, and I was paddling a downriver racer, which is sort of covered with a spray skirt on, and I just jumped in the boat, and I had pair of shorts on and a t-shirt and my life jacket, and I had a basic, I think I had 2 bananas taped to the back deck or something like that, and off I went.
For a 110 kilometre paddle.
Yeah. And what I did was I had just bare feet, and when you paddle, you sort of twist ever so slightly at the hips, and dragging my heels on the bottom of the boat, it was like on 80 grit wet and dry sandpaper. And when I opened at the halfway line, I pulled the spray skirt off. There was just like, the water was sort of red in the bottom of the boat from my chewed out heels. So there was plenty of hardships. Well, actually, it got worse because you're meant to have a ground pit crew that's halfway down. You meet them and there's a checkpoint, and they can restock your food provisions. And when I arrived there, I couldn't find my pit crew. And I don't think they were actually there because the tide had run with us and I got there sooner. So rather than give away the time I'd made up, I just basically left, and on the way out, I got given another couple of bananas by someone, which I duly taped to the back deck. But I sweared and cursed for the next hour because when I arrived at this pit stop, people's crews had tents set up and hot showers, and they got out of the boat and they stood under this, the billy had been boiled and under the hot shower, and they had a masseuse there and they were shoveling in hot pasta, and
you got thrown a couple of bananas.
7 hours of paddling, I got another couple of bananas.
Well, let's have a support crew. Wiz, would you like to be our support crew, mate? We'll set you up there. I'll give you a 6-pack. We'll have that pre-chilled and watch a bit of Netflix. Happy to do that?
This is an average Wednesday night then.
We might take some provisions with us just in case.
Love the wizard. Well, I'm genuinely looking forward to doing that. Hey, but I got to close out as well on the quirks from Suzanne. Yes, Andrew, he does have some quirks. He rarely reads a full book. He can't walk past rubbish and not pick it up. He's constantly standing up, pushed over e-scooters.
True. Yeah, I mean, I
you just think, like, how could someone have the audacity to not put their bike up and treat it with respect?
It's less about that. It's more about what's the value in walking past a can or a McDonald's wrapper or something that is right next to a garbage bin, or where you're on your morning walk and you can see a garbage bin in sight. If everyone just sort of picked a bit up for someone that was too lazy to put something in the bin, well, you wouldn't have a problem. And I travel so many places around the world where people just live in what looks like a rubbish tip. So I don't know. I just do my bit. It might be I'm probably slightly OCD as well, so that helps.
Can you walk over cracks?
I can actually step on them, I think, is the
Really?
test. I think if you're truly OCD, you just only step between the cracks. But I'm not that OCD. Healthily OCD, I describe it.
Yeah, healthy OCD. Yeah, love it. Let's talk about range resilience and adapting to change. I've got an article from the AFR in 2016. This is about you and Spotless. Sheppard had an unwanted baptism of fire, however. Less than 2 weeks after starting in the top job, Spotless was forced to announce a shock profit downgrade which sent the share price tumbling. The relative comfort, they say, of KPMG might have seemed a much better spot at that point, as analysts and fund managers screamed. But 10 months on, things have stabilised, even though the share price still languishes. And Mr. Sheppard is enjoying the responsibility and intellectual challenge of modernising a somewhat staid and old-school organisation. His mantra is creating a smarter Spotless. That includes using drones in asset maintenance activities in remote areas, developing apps to streamline food, ordering across the spectrum from school canteens to the vast crowds at sporting fixtures like the MCG, and using automated guided vehicles to shuttle along supplies in higher tech hospital corridors. He's a huge believer in saying yes to fresh opportunities. It would sage advice for him during his time in professional services. And he says it's a good path to follow for those who want to end up running a company. You just have to keep moving. That is the key, Sheppard said. Gee, there's lots of lessons there. Let's go back to that time period. Remember that first couple of months at Spotless? Because there's so many things happened. I'll leave it with you to share as little or as much as you want to about that period.
Yeah, look, I think the first port of call is why would you leave? Because I've spent substantively most of my professional career prior to moving to run that public company in professional services. So first of all, why would you move from professional services? And look, the appeal for me was Spotless had 37,000 employees. It was one of Australia's largest employers. And the lion's share of the workforce were on the minimum wage. People that were doing catering and cleaning and, large commercial laundries. And, we would run hospitals, everything other than clinical care. So, the car park, the orderlies, the grounds maintenance, the catering, the laundry, and so on and so forth. So I grew up in a very working class city in Wollongong. And my parents were both pharmacists serving a heavily migrant community of people that work incredibly hard, blue-collar workers. So I was really drawn to the business for that reason. I just thought it was real people doing real work that mattered, that changed people's experience. So I took a lot of passion into the role. Needless to say, certainly the whole time I was there was probably the most challenging time in my career, but also the most rewarding. And you might recall that it was the day before I started. Actually, I was due to start on the Monday, and on the Sunday we had we provided a lot of services to Defence, to ADFA, and we were driving buses, with cadets up and down from the coast. Spotless was, and there was a terrible motor accident, and the bus rolled over, and some cadets were really seriously hurt. So my first day started on Sunday. When I flew to Canberra, immediately that I heard, I went straight to Canberra. Actually, the clock hadn't actually started on my role yet, but that was kind of a bit of what was to come in the first few weeks. I mean, I think 2 days later we had an individual that had a really serious workplace injury. There was we were in the midst of negotiations around EBAs with unions, and had some really unfortunate media that was positioned, to try and get advantage in those EBA negotiations. Had a couple of material contracts that we'd bid on that we'd been the underbidders in. And then to your point, the numbers, those contracts included, the numbers were not delivering to market guidance. So we had to realign that guidance.
So you're in there, everyone's thinking, this guy's come from KPMG, and then you're downwriting the whole business. You're getting hammered, right? You're getting hammered in the media. You would have been getting hammered by investors. Did you ever have a moment where you thought, why didn't I stay at KPMG?
Well, look, I think that's part of those roles, but undoubtedly, it's tough for anyone that works in the public company environment where you're required to give guidance, where it's materially changed, and there'll be plenty of CEOs and CFOs that have been in front of major investors, and when the share price falls, their positions deteriorated, and there's plenty of enthusiasm in the sorts of questions that they ask and the pressure they put you under. But that's, that really is part of the role. And I think all you can do is, again, be authentic, call things as they are, and be completely transparent within the guidelines, and go from there. But look, there's no doubt that it was pretty high pressure stakes in a lot of ways, but I genuinely believed in the business, and we did some really great work, including some of those things that you described. Really clever stuff. I mean, if you think about
there's full on. There's tech. There's
if I give you an example, we used to do a lot of vegetation management. So if you think about a big divided road, like down St Kilda Road in Melbourne, for example, where it's very leafy with trees in the middle and down the sides, and we'd go and cut back the vegetation, and you'd do it based on a schedule. Well, of course, these days with sort of space-driven imagery, satellite imagery, you can actually set some metrics around the growth. And so you trim based on the level of growth. So when it gets outside the parameters, you go and trim it. So if you have an extraordinarily dry season, you might halve the cost of councils trimming stuff rather than doing it on a routine basis. So introducing all those sorts of efficiencies.
Do you reckon that could work on my hair? Have you got some innovation?
Yeah, possibly.
Why do you laugh?
You can probably tell when you look in the mirror.
I could go to Turkey. I had a mate of mine recently went to Turkey, came back. He swears he didn't get the teeth done, but his teeth look remarkably straight, and he's got a full hatch of hair. So there's options for us, Marty.
There you go. But I think the corollary to the to the Spotless story was at the end of that sort of adjustment, realignment, reorientation of the business, building of the management capability, reset of the strategy, and so on. The value was seen in the business by another public company, which ultimately took us over in a hostile takeover. And I think CEOs and boards' responsibility is to get value for shareholders, irrespective of how that comes. It could be running the business for 50 years, or it could be agreeing to a takeover that delivers value today that would take you a generation to deliver. And the premium that was offered by Downer was a really material premium.
And what was the time period from when you went in there to Downer?
About 2 years.
Yeah, I thought it was 2 years.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good result. Yeah. Now, in that time period, I don't think I've worked with any CEO who's had as many cartoons in the AFR. They're multiple, and we'll put a few up on YouTube. Have you got a favourite, or is there one that comes to mind? I've got a print out here, and they're never really favourable, but you've come out all right on that one as well. Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's particularly flattering personally, but there was one I quite liked, which was when we were trying to build the narrative around what the business would look like into the future versus the past. There was a great cartoon which recognising we were a laundry. We had the biggest commercial laundry operation in Australia, and they had a picture of me sort of bent down, spinning the dial on a dryer, and it said, I think the headline was "Sheppard puts it on spin." I did quite enjoy it. But look, I think if you do high profile roles, you've got to be pretty thick-skinned, and it doesn't mean that sort of stuff doesn't challenge you. Did
you read the newspapers in that period? Because you have everyone else saying, "Hey, I saw this article in the AFR or the Australian."
I didn't read every word, and I didn't react to what was written. But I always had a loose cover, because I think you need to understand the mindset of a whole range of stakeholders, and a lot of people form that view from reading what's in the in the media. So I think you can't ignore it.
Knowing you, though, your identity is not your career title. Like, you take it seriously, but you balance outside. I've spoken a lot about that on this podcast. When your role identity is inextricably linked with your personal identity, some stage that changes, and often non-voluntarily. So when you're not the title, what are you outside? But you've got a real purpose-based identity as well. You know who you are as a human. the biggest smile you've had in this whole discussion today is when you talked about your beautiful children and Suzanne. So it's that warmth and connection. So I feel you could take everything away from you from a corporate sense. You'd still feel connected. You'd still have love. You'd still have joy in your life.
Yeah,
That's
no, you would. But I mean, I think if you just reflect on a safety net and that's your comfort and it makes it okay to do something or to read something, I think that's a bit flawed as well. I mean, I think, you need to be authentic and true to your value set. And, I have and wouldn't do anything that, was unethical or wasn't consistent with my value set. And that ultimately is my protector. And, I know someone might have a cheap shot in a newspaper article, but, I know that I'm not going to be revealed as being something that I'm not. And I think that gives you the comfort to carry on. I mean, I think if you think about sectors that have been challenged, the Hayne Royal Commission where, regrettably people that worked in the banking sector, if they're at a barbecue and they got asked what they did, they didn't really want to say they were a banker. And then
friends of CommBank for a couple of years with the Royal Commission, they would honestly not wear their CommBank kit, or even some of my friends through Can for Cancer.
But if you then go into sort of aged care and the Royal Commission around that, and then you go into media and data leaks, and then and so on and so forth, and we've now got the superannuation industry under a bit of attention in my own profession, through the challenges that the profession's had. I think those things come and go, and I've also sort of observed some of the media attacks on individuals. Some of them I think warranted, but I think if I contrast it with what I see in the US. In America, to be a CEO worth their salt, you'd have to have some scars. And, I think here we're brutal, and the career ending, some of the things I see which are career ending off the back of, positioning of others. I do think sometimes they're challenging. And maybe there's more we need to do as a country around what develops really great and resilient leaders.
Is it the tall poppy syndrome? Is it we're trying to pull our leaders back down?
I don't know. Maybe part of it is what. Look, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm curious that a headline buys a click, and a click derives revenue. So, to kind of embellish or to dress up something and to bleed it for more and more time. I think maybe that's part of it. But I think the other thing is people consume, it's not Trump fake news, but the veracity of some of the content that people are pushed and read is probably a bit challenged as well.
A good segue into talk about the future of consulting and changes due to AI. A recent article reports artificial intelligence, or AI, is enjoying a long moment in the spotlight, but debate continues over whether it's a shortcut to utopia or possible harbinger of the end of the world. Meanwhile, one group has quickly leapt on both the technology and all the hype, consulting firms, and they've been spending big. The big four firms are heavily investing in AI and automation to process their operations. PwC committed $1 billion to embed generative AI across its services, and KPMG has partnered with Microsoft for a $2 billion AI initiative and an additional $100 million investment with Google Cloud. Parallel with that, an article in the AFR said, from dominance to disruption, why the big four are shedding jobs. The big four firms, Deloitte, PwC, EY and KPMG, are undergoing a structural shift as layoffs sweep across their consulting divisions. This trend reflects changing client priorities, increased adoption of AI and a growing preference for in-house teams over traditional consultancies. If I read that, Martin Sheppard, and had no idea about consulting firms, I'd be going, oh my goodness, the end is coming.
I think there's three thematics there that are probably worth unpacking. One is, how do we use AI and the next technology revolution for the way we run our own business, so the internal element. The second bit is, what's going to happen with AI and our client base and the services we deliver. And then the third element is around the performance of the professional services firms and job losses. I think sort of broadly three categories.
I was being a bit sensational, wasn't I? You want to build the drama, Marty, and have our audience go,
look, they're all interesting. I mean, I think if you look at our businesses, on a really simplistic analysis, you could go, well, why would you use all the services that we deliver, and why wouldn't you just plug the machine in the wall and ask an AI tool what the answer should be? I mean, and that's the sort of the disruption, fear-mongering piece that is out there. But look, I think if I think about the way that we run our business and the things that take time and cost us money, if you think about writing a piece of tax advice, for example, using an AI tool to use our precedents database in order to cut the first piece of advice, we should be able to do that much more quickly and simply than we historically have been able to do it, where someone's needed to spend half a week trying to trawl through all of the precedents databases and so on. Doing proposals and bring together CVs and those sorts of things.
Like I've said to you before,
exactly.
Our little business, I reckon we've got 1.5 to 2 FTEs equivalents with AI. Like what we do with the podcast, like Wizard spits it in, Sheppard spits it in. It's even doing media bites. It gives us 10 suggested media clips of grabs that we've spoken about today, show notes. We used to have someone type those up. Now, bang, it's all AI generated. It's good. It's fast.
No. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a huge opportunity for productivity plays, which actually, ironically, they have one of two benefits. One, something that you previously offshored to put into a lower cost jurisdiction, now probably you don't, because you just don't do it, or you do it using an AI tool. Second thing is it sort of liberates our people to do the work that's valuable and meaningful. So, I think it's a shift of effort rather than a displacement of effort. But I think, if you think about the AI revolution more broadly, the real value of all business is to enhance their customer experience. So you want to be able to put the customer in control of the way that they use your service. And if you think about a government agency, like doing your motor registry stuff or renewing your license or car registration or whatever, there used to be a time where you had to go into the motor registry and do all that.
I'm headbutting. Can you remember how punishing that used to be? It was horrible.
And now you can do it sort of digitally, but there's not you don't control the transaction and the experience in the same way you do when you get in an Uber, where you can score the driver and you can see exactly where they are, and that level of transparency and command over your own data and so on and so forth. And AI gives us the opportunity to use all of the data and sort of triangulate it and use it for customer benefit, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So that sounds good as a proposition. But if you're an organisation, how do you actually do that? Well, at the moment, I've got data in pot A and pot B and pot C, and I've got some of it that's offshore and some of it that's onshore. And most of it's on premises. So it's in our building, it's not in the cloud. Now, to use AI effectively, you need a common data lake, you need it to be in the cloud, and then you can start using AI tooling, which is going to be heavily embedded in the technology platforms that we buy from Microsoft and various others. So if you go back to our business, well, from a client perspective, yes, there's this AI revolution, but how do you get to a position where you can actually leverage it? So the work that we'll be doing, I think, for the decade to come will be how do we migrate an SAP on-prem system to SAP in the cloud? How do we combine the data lakes? And then every time we move that data, how do we keep it safe? Because we're in a world of cyber terrorism where we're just being constantly attacked. So, the data needs to move and it needs to be safe. And then, it has to be attested to and so on and so forth. So, you need investment monies in order to spend the money you need to spend on the digital upgrade and so on. So, far be it from me seeing our businesses being cannibalised by technology. I just see it being a great feeder of the great work that we do.
Give me your hands. I'm going to put it up on the imaginary crystal ball. Can you put them on the crystal ball? Wizard will put in some crystal ball music like he does. Let's look forward in 5 years. What does KPMG, what does a consulting firm look like? Is the first question. And second question on the crystal ball, what are you doing in 5 years?
I mean, if I think about if I start with the professional services firms, I think what's really important is to understand their size and reach. We operate in 160 odd countries. We turn over somewhere in the sort of mid 40 billion US dollars worldwide. So I think if we were listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, just if that was we're a private partnership obviously, but if we were listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, we'd be the second largest organisation to BHP by revenue. I mean, that's the size and reach of these businesses. So, and they've been established for 150 years and they've evolved as I've described earlier. So I see no scenario where the professional services firms, are marginalised. I think 160,000 of incredibly smart people in Australia. The average age of an employee is 29 years old, and we will continue to evolve our services, including the tech revolution and AI and so on. They'll just be different services. And I actually think in a less certain, less trusting world, a lot of what people buy from professional services firm is trust. They're trying to validate, assure, attest. They're trying to comply with a legal framework and so on and so forth. And I think those things just get more acute. So I just see the firms sort of modernising and evolving in that revolution, but still being really strong.
What about an effervescent, energetic, other alliteration of the E, exuberant Martin Sheppard? What are you doing in 5 years' time?
Look, I'm not sure.
You'll be paddling the Hawks with me because I reckon we'll do 1 year.
Hopefully that's before 5 years because I think
we'll be doing it on an annual basis.
It's only going to get hard. It's only going to get harder. But look, I think my sort of career life lessons are: if you ever feel like you're stagnating, it's time to move. And sometimes that can happen over a period of time, or you can just wake up and you sort of feel like you're on the treadmill and you're doing the same thing and you're not really learning. That leads to questioning how you're contributing. So if at any stage I get that feeling, I'd be the first person to sort of hang up this shingle because it's time to get out of the way and let someone else do it. And I would hope that it never happens for me that someone else taps you on the shoulder and has that discussion with you. I think I'm self-aware enough to know, when I'm losing the energy. So, look, I think ours is a great firm. I've still got much more to contribute. Perhaps if I look beyond our shores, we are a global organisation. I think there's more we can do in our region and globally, and maybe I can have an increasing contribution to that.
Watch this space. It's crazy to think that professional service firms used to retire people. It was amongst the big four, EY, KPMG, Deloitte and PwC, it was between 58 and 62. I never understood that. Look, I understood from a survival of the fittest and a talent. You want to tap a few people on the shoulder, men and women, say, hey, thanks for your tenure. Move on, champs, and I'll let the young people come through. But this notion that you get to 58 and then suddenly you have no intellectual horsepower. I never used to sit easy with that. It has been challenged. They've removed that barrier, right? So there's no cap on your age now. So if you're 65, 70, still offering extreme value, do you still see partners, still see people in consulting firms at that age, 65, 70 and beyond? Is that where it's going to go?
I mean, I think those partnership enshrined age-based limits in Australia have largely been removed. Very definitely not around the world in other jurisdictions. I think about it slightly differently. Our structures, people progress quickly, and if you're at age 58 or 60, you've probably been a partner for 20 or 25 years. The pace is unrelenting. The expectation is high, and my experience is most people by about that time are actually exhausted. They've earned retirement, or they're actually just looking and it's healthy for them to do something else. And remember that the profession's provided great feeder stock into, non-executive director careers and, also various and broader advisory type roles. So I didn't really see it as necessarily a restrictive thing. I thought it was sort of a healthy thing, and it did also create the pathway for the next generation of partners to come through. But that said, those restrictions have now moved, and you and I know that people have different energy levels for different lengths of time and want to and can contribute at different paces. So, I think it'll kind of vary and vary a bit, but
Yeah, it's one thing you didn't
but
tell
probably
me.
Not too much.
When we were in our courting period, when KPMG was buying the performance clinic, I had an unconscious incompetence, and one of my mates, Mario, said, "What do partners do?" And I told him. He said, "You don't really know, do you, Andy?" I said, "No, I don't," because there's a lateral hire coming in. But Marty, I learned so much. Like honestly, even when you're talking today about AI and the changes, I now get that. Whereas I had no idea about risk, compliance, stakeholder engagement, global jurisdiction. I can remember I rang you up a few times and you said, "Yeah, here's this, navigate that." It is a hotbed of learning. And I am so grateful, mate, for the opportunity I had with KPMG and that original opportunity with you, because the business that I'm running now is so different. I'll never go back. And a lot of that, I really, really am so grateful to what I learned at KPMG.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of worked in both environments. And, I think if you're smaller and arguably more entrepreneurial and so on, you have less of those sort of processes and protocols and so on.
But it's also a problem because if you are wanting to grow and scale,
Correct.
you get to a certain level and you blow up.
And if you want to raise capital or go to market or any of those sorts of things. But I mean, I think in terms of our business globally, I mean, we are a globally recognised iconic brand, and we deliver things for our clients that are, governments and corporates, which are sort of nation building. And, I don't want to overstate it, but the sorts of things that we are, engaged in and supporting are really important things. And the organisations and governments we're working with require our brand to have the veracity that it has. And that means that we won't work for someone that, has grossly breached human rights or, so we need to slow down to make sure that we protect the interests of all of our people and all of our clients. And sometimes, I think when you're new and in and you just want to do the next project, it can seem just totally stifling and it feels like you're being held back. But actually, it's the iconic brand that gives you the permission to play, and it's only as good as its weakest link. So you just got to get that positioning right on the continuum.
I sound like I'm here recruiting, but if anyone, I've said this to people and other entrepreneurs when they've asked, how have you flipped a few businesses? What's your secret? There's no secret. The first one I did, it was an absolute fluke. The second one sort of navigated. The third one, I think I've got a process. But I say to people, go work for a consulting firm. If you really wanted to chart a pathway to be an entrepreneur or build a business, have a period where you go work for one of the consulting firms. You learn so much. Even if you're not going to stay there, you'll import that knowledge. Biggest thing I think I learnt, Marty, was, and I had a wonderful coach that KPMG put me onto, Jill. Hello, Jill. She said it was like I was flying a plane. I was the pilot. Suddenly, Andrew, you're in a firm with 10,000 people in Australia, 500 partners, there's 500 pilots. You need to share the command, the joystick with 500 other partners. That was a huge shift for me, Marty. Like with you, your energy, sometimes you said that can almost be seen as a weakness. I think my drive as being an entrepreneur was maybe misplaced, sometimes maybe not misplaced, as arrogance and not playing in the sandpit with the other kids. That was a massive learning for me.
Yeah, I mean, I have... I have great respect for people that work in small to mid-sized businesses. We have 10,000 employees in Australia. We've got about nearly 700 partners, and there's a hell of a lot of people in my building that can do what I do. Having the great joy of being able to rely on one of my other owners to do what I do if I need to have a week's leave, as I did last week. Small to medium-sized business doesn't have that privilege. So, I think, from a graduate perspective, we take on nearly 1,000 graduates a year. We provide a really incredible environment for them to learn. We train them, like they won't get trained anywhere else. And actually they learn a lot about what authenticity and values-led leadership, and ethical leadership really looks like. So, I feel the burden of that as an organisation for the benefit of Australia. And I know there's been a bit of a beat up on consultants, but I know what we do.
A bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, there has. And so some of that, absolutely. I mean, we're not beyond being called to account. Of course we're not. But I do know the incredible work that we do. I know that we hire the best of the best in terms of graduates, and we give them an incredible opportunity to learn. And as you say, some of those want to work with our great firm for a long time, and others not so long. But that's I think there's a benefit there for those that join us.
Suzanne mentioned a word before that I want to bring up again in relation to a psychologist named Arthur Brooks. He's an American psychologist known for his expertise in human learning and memory. He talks about our brain development, and while working memory is at its best in our 30s and 40s, it's the ability to synthesise. I just thought it was uncanny. Suzanne mentioned that word, synthesise, and that's being able to pull together all the data points in our 50s and come up with patterns and models. So let's have a quick listen to an excerpt from the Finding Mastery podcast with Michael Gervais, and then I'll pick up on that theme.
That's the comparative advantage at the end of the day.
Yeah. Can you make it simple, digestible, something that can be actioned?
Yeah. And I couldn't have done that at 35. I mean, I was writing academic journal articles that were mathematical theorems. I was doing work on genetic algorithms, which is early artificial intelligence that was so sophisticated that I can't read the math today.
Come on.
No, totally. And now I have an audience of 500,000 readers a week in the Atlantic, where I'm explaining relatively nuanced science that I'm not actually performing, but I'm interpreting for an audience of smart, interested people that are doing important things like playing sports and running companies. That's my goal. Now, when I was 35, I had a lot of fluid intelligence that made it possible for me to participate innovatively in that literature. And now I have a lot of crystallized intelligence where I can synthetically take these ideas and say, this is what it says. Here's why it matters. Here's how you use it. And that's what you do too.
Awesome. Yeah.
On your show every week.
Mate, that's you. You're the synthesizer. You've got this ability to pull complex, contrasting information from multiple areas, process it and make it simple for people to understand from executive level right through to people on the street. How do you do that?
Look, I don't. But
you know what I'm talking about, though.
No,
Like,
no, no.
You've got a gift.
I do, and I mean, I'm not unique. I think that's one of the things that experience gives you. You traverse a lot of different situations and transactions, and I've had the great.
I'm going to correct you. You're a bit rare because I've come to you a few times and gone, "Hey, Marty, we're doing this pitch or marketing deck, or here's what I'm doing with the business," and I've just been there going, "Oh." Do you remember the Count on Sesame Street? And he's trying to do the I'll never get it. Don't. And I'm banging my head on the piano. And you go, oh, it's pretty, like you don't say it's easy. You just go, do this, that. I can spend 10 or 15 minutes with you, sometimes even on the phone, and you just unlock and it's like, and I missed it. So you're not normal. There's something you have, whether it's innate, whether it's learned, probably a combination of the two. You know what I'm talking about. Like you can absolutely pick the patterns.
I think, I've had the great privilege of working through a family that had a small business. I've had a number of different roles along the way. I've had the great privilege of working at the top end of town with some incredible boards and management teams across organisations like BHP and Qantas and Woolworths and Wesfarmers and so on. So it's been very privileged in that respect. But I don't think it's that unique in that, you can read a signboard, experienced mechanic here, 25 years service or something. And you drive past and you go, wow, there's an experienced mechanic. But if you do the same thing year in, year out for 25 years, you've really had 1 year's experience. You've just done it for 25 years, right? You go to a mechanic that has worked on massive machinery up in the Pilbara, and then they've been in the merchant navy and they've drifted around the world on big diesel tankers, and then they've been in the aviation industry and they've been in a fabrication plant and they've gone and worked with composites and carbon fibres and so on, and you have a mechanical problem, I can guarantee the second of those two people is going to be much more likely to fix and diagnose your problem. And it's, that's the same analogy. I mean, I think if you can keep the funnel wide, you get the opportunity to capture more. And then the trick is, with all of that stuff in the funnel, there's a real art to having the thing pop out the bottom that's the thing you need when you need it. And, often that's just knowing where to sort of hive off as the no-go zones and, where to identify as the territories, and then you can kind of build out from there. So, I think that's the challenge.
As well as, if I pull on that thread a little bit, you still focus on your physical and psychological well-being. You mentioned training your brain for the first half of our life. You're nurturing the brain. One thing we didn't talk about, you mentioned lightly, you had last week off. You still connect with your mates. You still have time with Suzanne. You take holidays. You're now telling me you recharge. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. You have a lot of interest. There's a whole process you have through design or default. I think that helps you regenerate, stay fresh, stay sharp. And it's that curiosity that's come out really loud and clear today.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. And I mean, it is a contrast to the early part of my career. I think when I left KPMG to do the Spotless role, I had a mountain of leave and a sabbatical and various other bits and pieces. I'm not sure I'd had a holiday for 20 years. And now I'm sort of a religious taker of time off because I just kind of feel that you need to declutter. And creating space for the next round of input and the next series of challenges is really important. And I think also dealing and interacting with people that are totally outside your circle is really refreshing. And I mean, look, I hate to admit it because it's not really my life, but I probably drank more beer and ate more palmies than any human should last week. But I tell you what, in equal proportions, I laughed and laughed and laughed. And
this is with your sailing mates doing a regatta?
Just with my brother and a bunch of other common mates. And we raced hard all week in really windy conditions. So there was plenty of thrills and spills, and then we had a few sherbies afterwards and ate pub food basically for a week, which I'm going to pay for.
Just do another shred.
But it is so valuable. It's kind of like you need to do everything in moderation, and having those checkout times is just absolutely crucial in my view.
I've only got one more question. This is called the flip. In preparation for this interview, is there a question you thought I'd ask that I haven't asked, or is there a topic you wanted to talk about that we haven't? Or the flip, is there a question you want to ask me?
I mean, I think the territory we haven't explored that I thought we might, and it's a difficult territory to talk through, is, life's not all sort of a bed of roses, and, I think it's a really tough times, and every human being has periods of self-doubt and, where things in their personal life don't go as well, and, families have illness and all those sorts of things. And I think, that's probably one area I've learned a lot more about. And, with age comes wisdom, and those experiences are not just work experiences, they're around life experiences. And I think we as humans need to be very dialed into those, not only recognising when I'm under a huge amount of pressure. It's easy to kind of look like you're wearing it lightly and, you're good in a crisis and all that stuff. It doesn't mean you don't go home carrying the world of, the world's problems on your shoulders. So I think knowing how to deal with that yourself, but also recognising it in other people is really important, because, we all have the low ebbs. And that's actually when real friendships and work relationships and trust is built. And it works in a client setting as well. If you're in the client service industry, you're going to have things that don't go well and you don't meet the customer's expectation, and you'll be judged not on how poorly something goes. It'll be on the way you recover and the way you support them in difficult times. So that's probably the one territory we haven't explored. And I know that you've had your ups and downs, like every human.
Yeah, well, the two that come to mind is cancer, and I've spoken about that on this podcast a few times. 16 years ago, my reference point is Michaela. I had a melanoma on my left shoulder. Gosh, the 3 months that I spent waiting to know whether I had the all clear or not, it put stuff into perspective. Exactly like you said, that time at Spotless, you now have that to draw as a reference point. So my reference is, I don't have cancer, I'm alive. It really is quite a sobering thought to come in. Sometimes I think I can almost come across as immune to what's going on around with the pressure, but I feel it, but I don't have cancer. Like, how good is that? The second one, and uncanny parallel, you were going through marriage separation at a similar time to me. I didn't know that you were doing that. We only found this out, after I started at KPMG and you were at Spotless. But that was a really challenging time as well, like going through a marriage separation and selling a business, and you weren't returning my phone calls. Just that compound. I think back to that period and I go, oh, what a time of growth and learning, and I had to pull on every resource. You said this, in that time at Spotless, that first month or two, while it was brutal, you learned so much. And I back what you're saying to people listening and watching to this. When you go through the tough periods, at the time you don't want to go, oh, this is awesome. This is really challenging. I'm going to learn and grow and develop. But you do. And I think when you do hit those headwinds, to give you a good sailing analogy, take a big breath in, just slow it down a little bit. There's a Hebrew proverb, this too shall pass, and it's true. But when you're in the thick of it and the amygdala response goes, the amygdala hijack, your body's in sympathetic nervous system, you're looking at everyone else thinking their lives are perfect, you can really whip yourself into a spiral.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, one sort of sailing analogy I quite like is you can't control the direction or strength of the wind, but you can tune the sails. So when you're in the tempest, to do the best you can with the things that you can control, and that's probably as good as it gets. And then the other, and I'm not sure where I heard this, but it sort of stuck with me. It's and this is in the context of people's lives, and life is sort of complex, and people have got stuff going on which you'll never know about. But it's the person that you think their life is perfect. The only thing about that person that's different to anyone else is you don't know them well enough. Mm-hmm. If you get to know them a bit better, you'll discover that, and my kids joke that, life can be a bit like an episode out of Modern Family.
That's ours. Well, you've been to my house, haven't you? Been the 4 kids. It's like, I think you and Suzanne left recently went, oh, how relaxing is it? It's true. The masquerade, again, as you get older, I think we get more comfortable with that. And the level of people you work with and I work with, we know everyone has stuff-ups and trials and tribulations. It's part of life and managing that. Hey, can I thank you for 3 things? Because I know you like 3s. Number 1 is I want to thank you for your time today. I know how busy you are and you've just been so authentic and genuine. So thank you for coming on the podcast. You don't normally do these. I appreciate it. Number 2, thank you for the guidance and wisdom you've given me and our friendship. And 3, I've now got a term. Thank you for helping me temper my sails at a few times when I've been in turbulent winds. I really appreciate you. I appreciate our friendship.
No, look, I mean, I've enjoyed the discussion, and I think great friendships are reciprocal, and I've lent on you at least as much as you on me. So it's been great over the years, and hopefully we'll do lots of things in the years to come.
We're going to do a Hawkesbury paddle. Come here, and give me a hug.
Just stretch your shoulders, make sure it's totally stuffed before.
I really appreciate you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Great. Thanks, mate.